The morning coffee mug shattered against Martha Carter's kitchen floor, her arthritic fingers frozen mid-grip as the sound pierced through their Oklahoma farm. Her 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy Scout wasn't just yelping. He was screaming in pure terror from somewhere near the old fishing pond, his desperate cries cutting through the September air like a blade through silk. What coiled around the golden puppy's tiny ribcage wasn't supposed to exist in Oklahoma. 15 feet of muscled death, thick as a telephone pole, squeezing tighter with each of Scout's panicked breaths. David Carter dropped his foreclosure notice and ran toward his mother's shouts, boots pounding across the dry grass as Bella, Scout's mother, circled the massive python with the calculating precision of a trained military dog. Martha's weathered hands clutched her chest, heart medication scattering like rice across the broken ceramic, but her Korean War-trained eyes locked onto the scene with deadly focus. "Not today," she whispered, Harold's old entrenching tool already in her grip. "Not my baby." Time had become Scout's enemy, and this 78-year-old widow, his only salvation. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Carter family farm had weathered more storms than most folks could count, but none quite like the one brewing in Martha Elizabeth Carter's heart that September morning. At 78, she carried herself with the stubborn grace of a woman who'd learned that survival wasn't about avoiding hardship. It was about staring it down until it blinked first. Martha had purchased these 40 acres of Oklahoma red dirt with her late husband Harold 35 years ago, back when their dreams were bigger than their bank account and their love stronger than their common sense. The farmhouse still creaked in the same spots, still caught the morning light through the kitchen window just right, still held the echoes of laughter from better days. But lately those echoes felt more like ghosts. Her son David had moved back home 2 years ago after his divorce and subsequent job loss, carrying shame like a second skin and financial troubles he thought he'd hidden from his sharp-eyed mother. At 45, David Michael Carter was a good man, drowning in circumstances beyond his control, unemployment checks that had dried up, bills that multiplied like weeds, and a mother whose fierce independence made accepting help feel like admitting defeat. The unspoken tension between them had grown thick as August humidity. Martha knew about the foreclosure notice David kept hidden in his jacket pocket, just like David knew about the heart medication she'd been rationing to afford dog food. They were two stubborn people protecting each other the only way they knew how, through silence and sacrifice. 8 years ago, when grief over Harold's passing had nearly swallowed Martha whole, she'd driven to the county animal shelter with no clear plan except escape from an empty house. That's where she'd found Bella, a 3-year-old German Shepherd with intelligent brown eyes and a story sadder than her own. The dog had been surrendered by a military family forced to move overseas, and something in Bella's dignified patience spoke to Martha's own experience of being left behind. Training. Bella had awakened something in Martha that she'd buried for decades. Memories of her service as a canine handler during the Korean War, skills she'd never spoken about, not even to Harold. The work gave her purpose, and Bella gave her companionship that didn't require small talk or sympathy casseroles. 4 months ago, when Bella gave birth to a single puppy, unusual for the breed, Martha had felt something she'd almost forgotten: pure joy. Scout was golden where his mother was dark, playful where she was serious, and completely unaware that his puppy antics were the brightest spot in a household struggling to keep the lights on. The farm might be failing, the bank might be circling like vultures, and her heart might be running on borrowed time, but Martha Carter still had fight left in her. She'd proven that in Korea, she'd proven it through Harold's illness, and she'd prove it again if necessary. She just hadn't expected that necessity to slither out of the morning shadows with scales and murder in its eyes. The morning had begun like every other Sunday in the Carter household, with the careful choreography of people trying not to burden each other. Martha rose at 5:30, as she had for 60 years, her joints protesting the Oklahoma chill that settled in the farmhouse despite September's lingering warmth. She moved quietly through her morning routine, taking her heart medication with the last of the orange juice, rationing the pills she couldn't afford to refill until David found work. David had been awake even earlier, hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, the blue glow illuminating the stress lines that had deepened around his eyes since moving back home. Job applications filled his screen, positions that paid half what he'd earned before in cities he couldn't afford to move to, requiring skills that technology had rendered obsolete while he wasn't looking. The foreclosure notice lay folded beneath a stack of bills, its red lettering a countdown he couldn't stop. 72 hours to pay $47,000, or lose everything his parents had built. When Martha shuffled into the kitchen, David quickly closed the laptop and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Mom. Coffee's fresh." "You're up early for a Sunday," Martha observed, though she knew better than to push. Their unspoken agreement had evolved over 2 years. She wouldn't ask about his job search if he wouldn't ask about her medication schedule. Bella padded into the kitchen behind Martha, her ears alert to sounds beyond human hearing. The German Shepherd had been restless all night, pacing between rooms with the focused intensity that Martha recognized from her military days. Something had disturbed the dog's sense of order, triggered the protective instincts that 8 years of peaceful farm life hadn't diminished. Scout bounced into the kitchen like a golden tornado, all paws and enthusiasm, completely oblivious to the adult tensions swirling around him. At 4 months old, he was pure joy condensed into 12 pounds of fluff and mischief, the kind of innocent happiness that made Martha remember why mornings were worth waking up for. "Look at that face," Martha chuckled, scratching behind Scout's ears as he pressed against her legs. "How can anyone be worried with this little one around?" David watched his mother's face transform in Scout's presence, the worry lines softening into something approaching peace. The puppy had been an unexpected gift, Bella's first and only litter after years of Martha insisting she was too old to deal with puppies. But when Scout arrived, small and perfect and completely dependent, something in Martha had awakened. She fussed over him like a new grandmother, teaching him tricks with the patience of someone who finally had time to spare. The irony wasn't lost on David. Just as their world was falling apart, they'd been blessed with this small creature who trusted them completely to keep him safe. After breakfast, Martha settled on the front porch with her second cup of coffee, watching Scout explore the yard under Bella's watchful supervision. The morning was unseasonably warm, the kind of Indian summer day that made Oklahoma beautiful before winter arrived. Scout had discovered a yellow butterfly dancing among Martha's surviving flower beds, and his clumsy attempts to catch it brought the first genuine smile to her face in weeks. "Go on, baby," she called softly. "Chase your dreams while you can." The butterfly led Scout on a meandering path across the yard, past the vegetable garden Martha couldn't afford to replant, toward the old fishing pond where Harold used to take David to catch bass on lazy Sunday afternoons. The pond had been Harold's pride, spring-fed and clear, stocked with fish and ringed with cattails that provided cover for the wildlife he'd loved to photograph. Now it stood neglected, the dock weathered gray and partially collapsed, weeds choking the shoreline where Harold's careful landscaping had once flourished. Martha avoided looking at it most days. It reminded her too sharply of dreams that had died with her husband. But Scout had no such reservations. The butterfly led him closer to the water's edge, where the morning shadows still lingered beneath the old wooden dock. Bella followed at a distance, her attention split between her puppy's adventures and something else, a scent or sound that kept her ears pricked forward in alert attention. Martha sipped her coffee and watched the scene with the bittersweet pleasure of someone storing up memories against future loneliness. In 72 hours, they might lose this view, this peace, this simple pleasure of watching a puppy discover the world. The bank wouldn't care about Scout's butterfly games, or Bella's protective instincts, or the way morning light turned the pond water into liquid gold. The phone rang inside the house, its shrill tone cutting through the peaceful morning. David's voice carried through the screen door, tense, worried, the tone he used when talking to creditors. Martha closed her eyes and let the warmth of the coffee cup ground her in the present moment. She had no way of knowing that beneath the collapsed dock, something ancient and patient had been waiting in the shadows, drawn by the unseasonable warmth and the promise of easy prey. The butterfly led Scout to the edge of everything Martha Carter thought she knew about courage. One moment the golden puppy was tumbling through the tall grass in pursuit of yellow wings and pure joy. The next, his playful yip transformed into a sound that would haunt Martha's dreams for years to come, a high-pitched scream of terror that cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. Martha's coffee mug hit the porch floor before her conscious mind processed what she was seeing. From beneath the collapsed dock, something massive and dark had erupted with lightning speed, coiling around Scout's small body with the practiced efficiency of a predator that had perfected this dance over millions of years. The Burmese python, 15 feet of muscle and malice, had been waiting. Escaped from an exotic pet smuggler's overturned truck 2 miles down the highway, it had found the perfect hunting ground in the abandoned pond area. Unlike the native snakes Martha had encountered during her 78 years in Oklahoma, this creature was an apex predator, built for one purpose: to crush the life out of anything small enough to swallow. Scout's desperate struggles only made the coils tighten faster. Each panicked breath caused the python to adjust its grip, a methodical process that would take 6 to 8 minutes to complete. The puppy's golden fur disappeared beneath thick brown scales as the snake positioned itself for maximum leverage, its cold eyes calculating and patient. Bella reached the scene first, her military-trained instincts overriding maternal panic. She circled the python with tactical precision, looking for an opening that wouldn't endanger her puppy. Her deep, commanding bark echoed across the farm, not the excited yapping of a pet, but the battle cry of a war dog calling for backup. Martha ran faster than she had in decades, her arthritic joints screaming protests that she ignored completely. The heart medication she'd taken that morning scattered from her pocket as she stumbled down the porch steps, each precious pill lost in the dirt while her grandson's life hung in the balance. "David!" she screamed toward the house, her voice cracking with desperation. "David, get out here now!" But David was inside, on the phone with yet another potential employer, his voice carefully modulated to hide the desperation that had become his constant companion. The sound of his mother's distress barely registered over his own internal crisis. Another rejection, another door closing, another step closer to losing everything. Martha reached the pond's edge just as Bella made her first assault. The German shepherd lunged at the python's head, teeth bared, aiming for the vulnerable spot behind the skull that Martha had taught her to target during their training sessions. But this wasn't a training dummy or an intruder with human limitations. This was 200 pounds of evolved killing machine, and Bella's attack only caused it to shift position, wrapping a secondary coil around Scout's chest. The puppy's breathing became labored, his struggles growing weaker. Martha could see his small pink tongue starting to turn pale, his bright eyes beginning to glaze with the terrible understanding that something was very wrong. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Martha Carter, Korean War veteran, widow, survivor of 7 decades of life's hardest lessons, stood frozen at the edge of her worst nightmare. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her chest, feeling her heart hammering against her ribs with dangerous intensity. The rational part of her mind cataloged her limitations. 78 years old, heart condition, arthritis in both knees, no weapons, no backup, no chance. But rationality had never been Martha's strongest suit. The sound that emerged from her throat was something primal, a roar of rage and determination that seemed to come from a place deeper than conscious thought. It was the sound of a mother, biological or chosen, facing the unthinkable prospect of watching innocence die while she stood helpless. "Not today," she whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Not my baby. Not on my watch." The python's head swiveled toward this new threat, its tongue flicking out to taste the air. For a heartbeat, predator and protector stared at each other across the battleground of the old fishing pond. The snake's eyes were black mirrors, reflecting nothing. No malice, no emotion, just the cold calculation of an organism designed to kill. Martha saw her reflection in those eyes and recognized something she hadn't acknowledged in years. The soldier she used to be. Not the frail widow who rationed heart medication and worried about grocery bills, but Staff Sergeant Martha Elizabeth Thompson, K-9 handler, Korean War veteran, the woman who had trained dogs to save soldiers and had never lost a single animal under her command. David finally burst from the house, drawn by Bella's continued barking and his mother's cries. He took in the scene at a glance. Scout disappearing beneath python coils, Bella circling frantically, his mother standing dangerously close to a creature that could kill her with casual efficiency. "Mom, get back!" he shouted, running toward them. "I'm calling 911!" "No time," Martha said, her voice steady now, transformed by purpose. She moved toward Harold's old tool shed with quick, determined steps. "By the time help gets here, we'll be digging a grave." David grabbed her arm, panic making his grip tighter than he intended. "You can't fight that thing." "Look at it. It's massive." Martha turned to face her son, and David saw something in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Not the gentle patience of the mother who had raised him. Not the quiet grief of the widow who had nursed his father through cancer. This was someone else entirely. Someone forged in the crucible of war and tempered by decades of protecting what mattered most. "David Michael Carter," she said, using the full name that had always meant serious business. "I didn't survive Heartbreak Ridge and 3 tours in a combat zone to watch a snake kill my grandbaby in my own backyard. Now you can help me, or you can get out of my way, but you cannot stop me." She pulled free from his grip and continued toward the shed, where Harold's old military entrenching tool waited among the rusted garden implements. The tool had followed Harold home from Vietnam, had helped him dig their first garden, had become part of the farm's history. Now it would serve one more tour of duty. Behind them, Scout's struggles were growing weaker, his small body disappearing beneath the python's methodical coils. Bella's barks had taken on a note of desperation that cut through Martha's heart like shrapnel. Time was running out and Martha Carter was done running from anything. Harold's entrenching tool felt like destiny in Martha's weathered hands. 24 inches of military-grade steel that had dug foxholes in frozen Korean ground and planted tomatoes in Oklahoma soil. The weight of it awakened muscle memory from a lifetime ago when Staff Sergeant Martha Thompson had been the best K-9 handler in the 8th Army and failure meant soldiers died. "Listen to me, David," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed under fire. "That python isn't just hungry, it's calculating. Every move we make, it's going to counter. We get one chance at this, maybe 2, before Scout." She couldn't finish the sentence, but David saw the truth in his mother's eyes. Scout's breathing had become shallow, desperate gasps that barely moved his tiny rib cage. The python had positioned itself with professional efficiency, using the collapsed dock as leverage while maintaining perfect pressure on its victim. Each adjustment of the massive coils was deliberate, methodical, designed to conserve energy while ensuring the kill. Bella circled the scene with growing desperation, her training warring with her maternal instincts. Martha had taught her to wait for commands, to never attack without strategy. But watching her puppy die was pushing the German Shepherd beyond the limits of discipline. "What's the plan, Mom?" David asked, though part of him couldn't believe he was asking his 78-year-old mother for military strategy. Martha studied the python's positioning with tactical eyes, noting the angle of its head, the distribution of weight along its coils, the way it used the dock's broken planks for anchor points. Memories flooded back, not just of Korea, but of the intensive training that had made her one of only 12 women certified to handle military working dogs in combat zones. "Constrictors need 3 things to kill effectively," she explained, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Leverage, time, and no interference. We're going to take away all 3. The first phase of Martha's plan was the hardest, making David understand that his size advantage meant nothing against a creature that could crush car doors. "You're going to create a distraction, but not by attacking. Get to the other side of the pond and make noise, bang on something metal, throw rocks in the water, anything to split its attention." "I'm not leaving you alone with that thing." "You're not leaving me," Martha said firmly. "You're following orders from a superior officer. Now move." David's legs felt like concrete, but something in his mother's tone, a command voice he'd never heard before, overrode his fear. He circled wide around the python, giving it plenty of space while positioning himself opposite Martha's intended approach. The second revelation came when Martha's foreclosure notice fluttered from David's dropped jacket, the official bank letterhead catching in the morning breeze. Martha's eyes tracked the movement, and in that instant the full weight of their crisis crashed over her. They were about to lose everything. The farm, their home, their history, and now this ancient evil had crawled out of nowhere to steal the one bright spot in their darkness. 72 hours, she whispered, reading the notice's deadline. Then, louder, "David, is this why you've been so distant? We're losing the farm?" "Mom, this isn't the time." "This is exactly the time." Martha's voice cracked with emotion. "You've been carrying this alone while I've been playing with puppies and pretending everything was fine. How much do we owe?" $47,000, David admitted, shame coloring his words. "I lost my job because of a false embezzlement charge. Couldn't prove my innocence, couldn't find new work, couldn't—" His voice broke. "I've failed everyone, Mom, Dad, you, even Scout." The python adjusted its grip, and Scout's whimper grew weaker. Martha felt something shift inside her chest, not the familiar pain of her heart condition, but the deeper ache of understanding. Her son had been drowning in silence, protecting her from worry while their world collapsed around them, and she had been protecting him from the truth of her own struggles, rationing medication and hiding pain. "David Michael Carter," she said, using his full name like a benediction. "Look at me." When their eyes met across the pond, Martha saw her own stubborn pride reflected in her son's face. 2 generations of Carters, both too proud to ask for help, too protective to share their burdens. "We are not victims of circumstance," she declared. "We are fighters. Your father fought in Vietnam, I fought in Korea, and now we fight for Scout. But we fight together." The tactical situation crystallized in Martha's mind with sudden clarity. The python had made one critical error. It had positioned itself with its head toward the center of the pond, using the dock for leverage, but limiting its mobility. If David could create enough distraction from the far side, Martha could approach from behind and use the entrenching tool to disrupt the leverage points. "On my signal," Martha instructed, "start making noise. Not aggressive. We don't want to make it defensive, just enough to divide its attention." What happened next would later be debated by animal behavior experts and military historians alike. Martha Carter, drawing on 60 years of buried training, began to speak to the python in a voice that carried no fear, no aggression, only the calm authority of someone who understood predators. "Easy, big fella," she murmured, moving slowly toward the creature's massive tail section. "You're not evil, just following instincts. But so am I." The python's head swiveled slightly toward the sound, its tongue flicking out to analyze this new threat. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Grandmother and apex predator locked in a primordial negotiation that transcended species. David banged his fist against an old metal bucket, the sharp sound echoing across the water. The python's attention flickered between the two humans, its perfect killing focus beginning to fragment. Martha saw her opening. Moving with precision that would have made her old drill sergeant proud, she positioned the entrenching tool beneath the python's midsection, just behind the coils that were crushing Scout. The leverage point was critical. Too close to the head and the snake would strike, too far toward the tail, and she wouldn't disrupt its grip on the puppy. "Bella," she called softly, using the Korean command phrase she'd taught the German Shepherd years ago. "Steady. Wait for my word." The python sensed the shifting dynamics, its prehistoric brain recognizing that the tactical situation had changed. It began to adjust position, loosening slightly from Scout to better defend against these coordinated threats. That microsecond of loosened grip was what Martha had been waiting for. "Now, Bella, secure." Everything happened at once. Martha drove the entrenching tool upward, creating a fulcrum that disrupted the python's leverage against the dock. David's noise-making intensified, drawing the snake's attention, and Bella, responding to commands drilled into her through countless training sessions, moved with surgical precision to grab Scout by the scruff of his neck. The python's response was lightning fast and terrifying. 15 feet of muscle whipped toward Martha with the speed of a striking viper. She had anticipated this. In Korea, she'd learned that every tactical decision carried risks, and the key to survival was managing those risks rather than avoiding them. Martha threw herself sideways, using the momentum to drive the entrenching tool deeper beneath the python's coils. The creature's strike missed her by inches, its head slamming into the dock with enough force to splinter wood. Scout popped free like a cork from a bottle, gasping and crying but breathing. Bella immediately grabbed him and retreated to safety, her maternal instincts finally satisfied. But the battle wasn't over. The python, now fully defensive and furious, coiled toward Martha with deadly intent. She had saved Scout, but the cost might be her own life. The creature was between her and safety, its massive head weaving hypnotically as it prepared to strike again. David screamed his mother's name and started running toward her, but they both knew he wouldn't reach her in time. Martha looked into the python's black eyes and saw her own mortality reflected there. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her arthritis screamed in protest, and her medication was scattered in the dirt 20 feet away. But she also saw something else in that reptilian gaze, recognition, not of her as a person, but as a threat that had successfully disrupted its hunt. The python wasn't attacking from hunger now. It was defending its territory from a challenger who had proven dangerous. "That's right," Martha whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm not prey. I'm the predator now." She raised the entrenching tool and took a step forward. The python, faced with a choice between escalating a fight with a determined opponent or retreating to fight another day, made the calculation that had kept its species alive for millions of years. It slithered backward into the water and disappeared beneath the pond's dark surface, leaving only ripples and the echo of its passage. Martha collapsed to her knees, the entrenching tool falling from numb fingers as the full impact of what had just happened crashed over her. They had won. Scout was alive. Her family was intact. But as David helped her to her feet and they rushed to check on Scout, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at a cost she didn't yet understand. The real battle, she suspected, was just beginning. The python's retreat should have marked the end of their ordeal. But as Martha knelt beside Scout's trembling form, she realized their fight for survival was far from over. The puppy's breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps, his small ribcage barely moving beneath golden fur that was now matted with pond water and fear. His eyes, usually bright with mischief, had taken on the glassy stare of shock that Martha recognized from her wartime service. "He's hurt bad," David whispered, his hands hovering over Scout's motionless body, afraid to touch and cause more damage. "We need to get him to Dr. Williams immediately." Bella whined softly, nuzzling her puppy with desperate gentleness, her brown eyes reflecting the kind of anguish that transcended species. She had done everything right, followed Martha's commands, executed the rescue perfectly, but a mother's instincts told her that victory might have come too late. Martha's own heart was hammering with dangerous irregularity, the combination of adrenaline and exertion pushing her cardiac system beyond its prescribed limits. She could feel the familiar tightness in her chest, the warning signs that Dr. Williams had made her memorize during their last appointment. But there was no time for weakness, no luxury of acknowledging her own mortality while Scout's hung in the balance. "David, get my truck keys," she ordered, her voice steady despite the pain spreading down her left arm. "We're not waiting for an ambulance." As David ran toward the house, Martha carefully lifted Scout, feeling the alarming looseness in his small body, the way his head lolled against her shoulder without the resistance of normal muscle tone. Internal injuries were invisible killers, she knew from Korea. Soldiers who walked away from explosions only to collapse hours later when organ damage finally claimed them. "Stay with me, baby," she whispered into Scout's ear, feeling his faint heartbeat against her palm. "We didn't fight that monster just to lose you to giving up." The drive to Dr. Williams' emergency clinic became a nightmare of Oklahoma back roads and mounting desperation. Martha drove while David held Scout, monitoring his breathing, calling out every change in the puppy's condition. Bella paced frantically in the truck bed, her protective instincts at war with her inability to help. "His breathing's getting worse," David reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "And Mom, you need to pull over. You're sweating and your hands are shaking." "I'm fine," Martha lied, gripping the steering wheel tighter to hide the tremor that had begun in her fingers. The pain in her chest was intensifying, radiating down her arm in waves that matched her heartbeat. She recognized the symptoms her cardiologist had warned her about, but acknowledging them meant stopping, and stopping meant Scout might die. "You're having a heart episode," David said firmly. "Mom, I can't lose both of you today." The weight of those words hit Martha like a physical blow. In her focus on saving Scout, she had forgotten the most important lesson from her military service: a dead hero saves no one. If she collapsed behind the wheel, they would all die in a ditch on some forgotten Oklahoma road, and Scout's sacrifice would mean nothing. She pulled over with the last of her strength, her hands barely able to turn the ignition off before the chest pain peaked in a crescendo that stole her breath completely. David was beside her in seconds, helping her into the passenger seat while taking control of the truck with the kind of decisive action she hadn't seen from him in years. "Dr. Williams' clinic is 5 minutes away," he said, his own fear carefully controlled. "Can you hold on that long?" Martha nodded, though speaking had become impossible. She focused on Scout, using her remaining strength to monitor his condition while David drove with the precision of someone who finally understood that being needed meant stepping up, regardless of fear. Dr. Sarah Williams was waiting for them at the clinic entrance, alerted by David's frantic phone call during the drive. At 55, she had treated everything from prize bulls to pet hamsters, but the sight of Martha Carter struggling to breathe while clutching an unconscious puppy presented a medical triage decision that would haunt her later. Treatment Room 1 for Scout, Treatment Room 2 for Martha, she ordered her assistant. Call County EMS for a cardiac transport and get my emergency surgery kit ready. No, Martha gasped, using precious oxygen to speak. Scout first. He's just a baby. Martha, you're having a heart attack, Dr. Williams said gently but firmly. If we don't treat you immediately, then you treat him immediately, Martha interrupted, her voice carrying the command authority that had made her legendary among Korean War K-9 units. That's an order, Doctor. The next hour became a blur of medical procedures and desperate measures. Dr. Williams worked on Scout while monitoring Martha's condition, trying to save both patients while David paced the waiting room like a caged animal, calling neighbors and fighting with insurance companies and struggling with the helpless rage of someone watching everything he loved slip away. Scout's injuries were extensive but not immediately fatal. Severe bruising around his rib cage, possible internal bleeding, and the kind of trauma-induced shock that could shut down a young animal's system if not treated aggressively. Dr. Williams worked with the focused intensity of a combat medic, using every tool in her veterinary arsenal to stabilize the puppy's condition. Martha's heart attack was the textbook result of extreme stress on an already compromised cardiac system. The EMS team arrived within 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes felt like hours to David, who found himself making the kind of life-and-death decisions he'd never imagined facing. We need to transport your mother to Tulsa General for emergency cardiac intervention, the lead paramedic explained. The local hospital doesn't have the specialized equipment she needs. What about Scout? David asked, looking through the treatment room window where Dr. Williams continued her work. Your mother made her choice, the paramedic said with professional compassion. She used what might have been her last conscious moments to ensure that puppy got immediate care. Now we need to honor that choice by getting her to people who can save her life. As the EMS team prepared Martha for transport, she grabbed David's hand with surprising strength, her eyes clear despite the pain medication. The farm, she whispered. Don't let them take the farm. Promise me. Mom, forget about the farm. We can live anywhere. No, she said firmly. This is where Scout learned to be brave. This is where you remembered how to fight. This is where our family becomes whole again. Promise me you'll find a way. David promised, though he had no idea how he could keep that promise with $47,000 in debt and no income. But as he watched his mother being loaded into the ambulance, he realized that keeping promises was sometimes more important than knowing how to keep them. Dr. Williams emerged from the treatment room as the ambulance pulled away, her surgical scrubs stained with evidence of the battle she'd just fought. Scout's stable, she reported, exhaustion evident in her voice. The next 24 hours will be critical, but he's young and strong. His mother's courage seems to run in the family. Bella whined from her position beside Scout's recovery cage, where she had stationed herself like a furry sentinel. Her vigil had begun, and everyone understood that she wouldn't be moved until her puppy was safe. Dr. Williams, David said, his voice hoarse with emotion. We can't afford, with Mom in the hospital and the farm situation. David Carter, Dr. Williams interrupted. Your mother saved my life 20 years ago when she talked me out of leaving veterinary medicine after a string of failures. She told me then that some debts can't be paid with money, only with service. Consider this the first installment. As the sun set over the Carter farm that evening, David sat in the hospital waiting room in Tulsa, maintaining vigils for 2 patients in 2 different cities. Scout was fighting for his life 40 miles away, while Martha underwent emergency cardiac surgery in the room just beyond the doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The foreclosure notice in his pocket seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of losing both of them, but Martha's words echoed in his mind. She had fought a python with her bare hands and an old military tool. She had saved Scout's life at the cost of her own health. She had shown him what courage looked like when everything was on the line. Now it was his turn to prove that courage was hereditary. The battle for the Carter family's soul had moved from a pond in Oklahoma to hospital rooms and bank offices, but David finally understood what his mother had been trying to teach him all along. Some fights are worth having, regardless of the odds. The question was whether he had learned the lesson in time to matter. The call came at 3:17 in the morning, shattering what little sleep David had managed in the hospital waiting room. Dr. Williams' voice was carefully controlled, the tone medical professionals used when delivering news that would change everything. "David, I need you to get back here immediately. Scout took a turn for the worse about an hour ago. His breathing became labored, and we're seeing signs of internal bleeding that we missed during the initial examination." David's world tilted on its axis. Martha was still in surgery. The cardiac procedure had revealed more damage than initially expected, requiring a complex intervention that could take several more hours. Now, Scout, the bright spot that had given his mother reason to fight a python with her bare hands, was slipping away in a veterinary clinic 40 miles from where David sat helplessly. "I'm on my way," he said, grabbing his keys with hands that shook from exhaustion and terror. The drive back to Broken Arrow became a journey through the dark night of David's soul. Every mile marker seemed to count down not just distance, but time. Time he didn't have. Options that were disappearing. Hope that was bleeding out as surely as the puppy he'd promised his mother he would protect. At Dr. Williams' clinic, the scene was heartbreaking in its quiet desperation. Bella lay pressed against Scout's recovery cage, her large body curved protectively around the space where her puppy fought for life. She hadn't moved from that position in 6 hours, hadn't eaten or drunk water, hadn't acknowledged David's presence beyond a brief glance that seemed to say, "You're supposed to fix this." Scout was nearly unrecognizable from the playful bundle of energy who had chased butterflies that morning. Tubes and monitors surrounded his small form, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor seemed far too slow, far too weak. His golden fur had lost its luster, and his breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps that made David's chest ache in sympathy. "The python's constriction caused more internal damage than we initially realized," Dr. Williams explained, her professional composure cracking slightly. "There's bleeding around his liver, and his kidneys aren't functioning at full capacity. In a larger dog, we might have more options, but Scout's so small." She didn't need to finish the sentence. David understood. They were watching a 4-month-old puppy die by degrees, his tiny body unable to recover from trauma that would challenge even a full-grown animal. "What can we do?" David asked, though part of him feared the answer. "Emergency surgery is possible, but it's extremely risky for an animal his size, especially given his current condition. The success rate is maybe 30%, and even if he survives the operation, there could be permanent damage. He might never be the same puppy your mother fell in love with." David slumped into a chair beside Scout's cage, the weight of impossible decisions crushing down on him. Martha was fighting for her life in a Tulsa operating room, trusting him to protect the small family they'd built together. The farm was 3 days from foreclosure. Their financial situation was hopeless, and now the innocent creature who had brought them so much joy was dying while David sat powerless to help. "There's something else," Dr. Williams said gently. "The surgery would cost about $8,000, plus post-operative care. I know your family's situation, and normally I'd work out a payment plan, But with equipment rental and surgical specialists, $8,000 might as well have been $8 million. David had exactly $437 in his checking account. Martha's Social Security was barely covering her medications, and the foreclosure notice in his pocket was a constant reminder that they couldn't even afford to keep their home. "I understand," David said, his voice hollow. "So we're really talking about making Scout as comfortable as possible and letting him pass peacefully," Dr. Williams finished. "I'm sorry, David. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go." The words hit David like physical blows. Let go. Give up. Accept defeat. Everything his mother had refused to do when facing down a python twice her size, everything she had taught him about fighting for what mattered most. He looked at Scout's small form, remembering the morning's joy, the way the puppy had made Martha smile even in the depths of their financial crisis. This wasn't just about a pet dying, this was about the last light going out in a family that had already endured too much darkness. "Dr. Williams," David said slowly, "if I could find the money somehow, what would Scout's chances really be? Honestly? With the internal bleeding and his current weakness, even with surgery, it's maybe 50-50 that he survives the next 24 hours. And if he does survive, he might have chronic health issues, mobility problems, shortened lifespan. He wouldn't be the carefree puppy he was this morning." David closed his eyes, trying to channel some of his mother's courage, her stubborn refusal to accept defeat when innocent lives hung in the balance. What would Martha do in this situation? What would she say if she knew he was considering letting Scout die because of money? The answer came with crystalline clarity. Martha Carter had faced down a python with nothing but an old military tool and 60-year-old training. She had risked her life for a puppy she'd known for 4 months because that's what love looked like when everything was on the line. "Do the surgery," David said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I don't know how I'll pay for it, but do the surgery. Scout deserves the same chance Mom gave him this morning." Dr. Williams studied David's face, seeing something there that reminded her of Martha's fierce determination. "David, I admire the sentiment, but I can't perform an $8,000 surgery without some guarantee of payment. The medical board has strict guidelines about—" "Then I'll mortgage what time we have left on the farm," David interrupted. "I'll call every payday loan place in 3 counties. I'll sell everything we own, but I won't let that puppy die because I was too scared to take a risk." Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Bella lifted her head for the first time in hours, her intelligent eyes focusing on David with what looked almost like approval. Scout's breathing seemed to steady slightly, as if responding to the conviction in David's voice. "All right," Dr. Williams said finally, "but I want you to understand what you're committing to. Win or lose, this surgery could bankrupt your family completely. You might save Scout only to lose everything else." David looked at Scout's unconscious form, then at Bella's expectant gaze, then at the empty space where his mother should have been standing, offering guidance and strength. "Dr. Williams," he said, "this morning I watched my 78-year-old mother fight a python to save this puppy's life. She didn't calculate the odds or worry about the consequences. She just fought for what mattered most. If I can't do the same, then I don't deserve to be her son." The decision was made. Scout would have his chance, regardless of the cost. But as Dr. Williams began preparing for emergency surgery, David couldn't shake the feeling that he had just committed his family to a path from which there might be no return. The universe, it seemed, had developed a twisted sense of timing. While Scout underwent emergency surgery in one building and Martha fought for her life 40 miles away, David's phone rang with news that would redefine everything he thought he understood about miracles and social media. "Mr. Carter, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 8 News in Tulsa. We'd like to interview you about the video that's been circulating online. The footage of your mother fighting the python to save your puppy has gone viral, and we've been getting calls from national outlets wanting to cover the story." David stared at his phone in confusion. "What video? What are you talking about?" "You don't know?" "Sir, your neighbor Sally Henderson filmed the entire rescue on her smartphone and posted it to Facebook this morning. It's been shared over 50,000 times in the last 6 hours, and the number is climbing exponentially. People are calling your mother a hero." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. While he'd been consumed with medical crises and financial disasters, the outside world had been watching his family's ordeal unfold in real time. The most private, terrifying moment of their lives had become public property, broadcast across social media for strangers to judge and comment upon. "I need to see this video," David said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. 20 minutes later, sitting in Dr. Williams's office while Scout's surgery continued, David watched his morning nightmare replay on his phone screen. Sally Henderson's shaky footage captured everything: Scout's desperate cries, the python's methodical attack, Martha's fearless charge with Harold's old entrenching tool. But what struck David most powerfully was how the video portrayed his mother not as a frail, elderly woman, but as a force of nature, a warrior grandmother who moved with deadly precision and absolute courage. The comment section was a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and heartbreak. "This woman is what real heroism looks like. 78 years old and fought a python with a shovel. I can't even kill spiders. Someone needs to help this family. Look at that brave woman. Is the puppy okay? Please tell me the puppy survived." But it was the comment from Sally Henderson herself that made David's hands shake as he read it. "This is Martha Carter, Korean War veteran and the strongest woman I've ever known. Her family is about to lose their farm to foreclosure, and now both she and the puppy are fighting for their lives in hospitals. If this video touches your heart, please consider helping a true American hero who gave everything to save an innocent life." David's phone immediately buzzed with a text from Sally. "I hope you don't mind, honey. I set up a GoFundMe page. People want to help." The GoFundMe page was simple, straightforward, and devastating in its honesty. Sally had included medical updates, background information about Martha's military service, and photos of the Carter farm in better days. The fundraising goal was modest: $50,000 to cover Martha's medical bills, Scout's surgery, and the farm's mortgage debt. When David refreshed the page, it showed $837 in donations from complete strangers. 5 minutes later, it showed $1,500. 10 minutes after that, $2,300. David watched in real time as his family's crisis became a rallying point for people across the country who had been moved by the video of a grandmother's courage. The donations came with messages that made him cry in Dr. Williams' empty office. "My grandmother would have done the same thing. Here's $50 for a real hero. Lost my dog last year to cancer. Wish I'd been as brave as Martha. $100 toward Scout's surgery. Served in Afghanistan. No courage when I see it. $200 for a fellow warrior. 78 years old and still fighting. My donation of $25 comes with prayers for Martha and Scout." By the time Dr. Williams emerged from surgery 3 hours later, the GoFundMe page showed donations totaling $12,000 from nearly 800 contributors. But David barely noticed the numbers. His entire attention focused on the expression on the veterinarian's face as she approached. "The surgery went better than expected," Dr. Williams said, pulling off her surgical gloves with hands that trembled from exhaustion. "We were able to repair the internal bleeding, and Scout's vital signs have stabilized. He's not out of danger yet, but he's fighting." David felt his knees buckle with relief. "Can I see him?" "He's still under anesthesia, but yes." "David, I have to tell you, I've never seen an animal fight for life the way Scout did during that surgery. It's almost like he knew how many people were counting on him to survive. Scout lay in a recovery cage surrounded by monitors and IV lines, but his breathing was stronger, more regular than it had been before the surgery. Bella immediately pressed against the cage, her tail wagging for the first time since the morning's attack. Even unconscious, Scout seemed to respond to his mother's presence, his small body relaxing into the deeper rhythms of healing sleep. David's phone rang again, this time with news that changed everything. "Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Tulsa General. I wanted to update you on your mother's condition. The cardiac surgery was successful, and she's stable in the ICU. We expect her to make a full recovery, though it will take several weeks of rehabilitation." "She's going to be okay?" David asked, hardly daring to believe it. "More than okay. Your mother has the cardiovascular system of someone 20 years younger, probably due to her military fitness background. She kept asking about her puppy, even as we were wheeling her into surgery. The nursing staff is quite taken with her." David closed his eyes and felt the first genuine hope he'd experienced in months. Martha was alive, Scout was fighting, and somehow the world had rallied to their cause in ways he couldn't have imagined that morning. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As David sat beside Scout's recovery cage, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Mr. Carter, this is Colonel James Patterson from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm calling about your mother, Staff Sergeant Martha Thompson Carter. We've been made aware of her situation through social media, and we need to discuss some benefits she may not be aware she's entitled to." "Benefits?" David asked, confused. "Mr. Carter, your mother was wounded in action during the Korean War and awarded the Silver Star for valor under fire. She's entitled to full disability compensation and medical benefits that she apparently never claimed. Based on our records, the VA owes your mother approximately $87,000 in back payments, plus ongoing monthly disability payments of approximately $1,500. David's phone slipped from numb fingers. $87,000. More than enough to save the farm, cover all medical bills, and ensure that Martha could live comfortably for the rest of her life. "Mr. Carter, are you there?" "I'm here," David managed. My mother never mentioned any of this." That's not uncommon for veterans of her generation, particularly women who served in non-traditional roles. The paperwork was often mishandled, and many service members weren't informed of their rights. But the video of your mother's heroism caught the attention of some people here who specialize in tracking down benefits for forgotten heroes. As David processed this information, Dr. Williams approached with another update that seemed too good to be true. "David, I just got off the phone with the Purina Company. They saw the video and want to sponsor Scout's recovery completely. All medical bills, plus a year's worth of food for your animals. They're also interested in using Martha's story in a campaign about the bond between people and their pets." David looked around Dr. Williams's office, then at Scout's peaceful form in the recovery cage, then at his phone displaying a GoFundMe page that had grown to over $20,000 while he wasn't looking. That morning, his family had been facing financial ruin, medical disasters, and the loss of everything they held dear. Now, 12 hours later, they were being celebrated as heroes, offered more help than they'd ever dreamed possible. And discovering that Martha's long-ago service to her country would finally be recognized and compensated. It felt too miraculous to be real, too perfectly orchestrated to be mere coincidence. But as David watched Scout's small chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of healing, and thought about Martha waking up in a hospital room to learn that their farm was saved and their future secured, he realized that miracles weren't about divine intervention. They were about the courage to fight when everything seemed hopeless, the love that motivated impossible sacrifices, and the way one act of authentic heroism could inspire thousands of strangers to prove that humanity was still worth saving. Martha Carter had fought a python with nothing but an old military tool and a grandmother's love. The world, it turned out, had been waiting for exactly that kind of reminder about what truly mattered. 3 months later, the Carter farm looked like a place where miracles had taken up permanent residence. The old fishing pond where Martha had fought for Scout's life had been transformed into a memorial garden, complete with a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of Martha Carter, Korean War veteran, and Scout, who taught us that courage comes in all sizes." The collapsed dock had been rebuilt, and the pond itself had been stocked with fish that Harold would have loved to photograph. Martha sat in her favorite rocking chair on the front porch, watching Scout chase the same yellow butterflies that had led him into danger all those months ago. The puppy moved with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of his encounter with the python, but his spirit remained undaunted. If anything, his brush with death had made him more precious to everyone who knew his story. "Slow down there, hero," Martha called softly as Scout tumbled through the grass with characteristic enthusiasm. "Save some energy for your therapy work tomorrow." Scout had become a certified therapy dog, visiting hospitals and nursing homes where his gentle nature and incredible survival story brought comfort to patients facing their own battles. The limp that might have ended another dog's career had become part of Scout's appeal, proof that healing was possible, that scars could be badges of honor rather than sources of shame. Bella lay beside Martha's chair, pregnant again with a litter that would be born on Christmas morning. The demand for puppies from the Hero dog line had been overwhelming, but Martha had carefully chosen the families who would receive Bella's offspring. Each puppy would go to veterans dealing with PTSD, elderly people facing loneliness, or children with special needs who could benefit from unconditional love. "Mom, you've got another interview request," David called from inside the house, his voice carrying the comfortable authority of someone who had found his purpose. In the months since the viral video, David had started a business managing social media for military charities and animal rescue organizations. His first-hand experience with the power of authentic storytelling had made him surprisingly successful at helping good causes find their audiences. "Tell them what I tell everyone," Martha replied with a smile. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a grandmother who refused to watch innocents die while I still had breath in my body." But the truth was more complex than Martha's modest deflection suggested. The video of her confrontation with the python had done more than save her farm or make her internet famous. It had started a movement. #MarthaStrong had become a rallying cry for people facing impossible odds, while #ScoutSurvival inspired those dealing with trauma and recovery. The Carter farm had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for veterans, animal lovers, and anyone seeking proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when love demanded it. Martha had reluctantly agreed to give tours twice a week, using the opportunity to raise money for animal rescue organizations and veteran support groups. Dr. Sarah Williams pulled into the driveway just as the afternoon sun was painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. She had become more than the family veterinarian in recent months. Her relationship with David had blossomed into something that Harold would have heartily approved of, and wedding plans were already in motion. "How's our patient today?" she asked, kneeling beside Scout to perform his routine checkup. "Ornery as ever," Martha replied with obvious affection. "He's been trying to dig up my flower beds again, and yesterday I caught him teaching the neighbor's cat how to open the chicken coop, doctor." Williams laughed as she examined Scout's surgical scars, now faded to thin silver lines barely visible beneath his golden coat. "His mobility has improved significantly since last month. The physical therapy exercises are working." "Physical therapy for a dog," David mused as he joined them on the porch. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be doing underwater treadmill sessions with a puppy, I'd have questioned their sanity. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be married to a woman who fights pythons with garden tools, I'd have run for the hills, Dr. Williams teased, reaching for Martha's hand to check her pulse as part of their daily routine. Martha's recovery had been nothing short of remarkable. The VA benefits had covered not just her immediate medical needs but also ongoing cardiac care that had restored her health to levels she hadn't enjoyed in years. The monthly disability payments had eliminated the financial stress that had contributed to her heart problems, and the recognition of her military service had given her a sense of completion that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. "Speaking of which," David said, pulling an official-looking envelope from his pocket, "this came from the Pentagon today." Martha opened the letter with hands that no longer shook from medication side effects or financial anxiety. As she read, her eyes widened with an emotion that was part surprise, part vindication, and part profound satisfaction. "They're promoting me," she said quietly. "Posthumously promoting the canine soldiers I worked with in Korea and upgrading my Silver Star to a Distinguished Service Cross. There's going to be a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery next month." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of recognition that had come 60 years too late, but still meant everything to a woman who had served her country in silence for most of her adult life. "Will you go?" Dr. Williams asked gently. Martha looked at Scout, who had settled beside her chair with the contented sigh of a dog who knew he was exactly where he belonged. "I think Scout and I have earned a trip to Washington. Besides, it's time those old war dogs got their due recognition." As the sun set over the Carter farm that evening, the family gathered around the dinner table that had been Harold's pride and joy. The formal dining room, once reserved for holidays and special occasions, had become their regular gathering place, a symbol of how their lives had been transformed from survival mode to celebration. "Before we eat," Martha said, raising her glass of sweet tea and a toast, "I want to say something." David and Sarah exchanged glances, recognizing the tone that meant Martha had been thinking deeply about something important. 6 months ago, we were three broken people trying to hold together a failing farm while pretending we weren't drowning in problems too big to solve. David, you thought you were a failure because you couldn't find work. Sarah, you were considering leaving veterinary medicine because you felt like you weren't making a difference. And I was rationing heart medication while watching everything Harold and I built slip away. She paused, looking at each of them in turn before continuing. That python didn't just attack Scout that morning, it attacked our family at our weakest moment, when we had nothing left to fight with except love and stubbornness. But sometimes that's exactly what the world needs from us. Not our strength or our success or our perfect plans, but our willingness to stand up for innocence even when we're broken ourselves. Scout, as if understanding that he was central to this moment, padded over to Martha's chair and placed his head on her lap. The gesture was gentle, trusting, and full of the kind of unconditional love that had started this entire journey. The money, the recognition, the interviews and book deals, those are all wonderful, but they're not why we fought that morning. We fought because a baby needed protecting, and protecting babies is what families do, whether those babies have 2 legs or 4. Martha scratched behind Scout's ears, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've learned something in these past months. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and choosing love anyway. It's about an unemployed man who mortgages his family's future to save a puppy's life. It's about a veterinarian who works miracles with her hands because she believes every life matters. It's about an old woman who discovers that age is just a number when someone needs saving." She raised her glass higher, and David and Sarah followed suit. "So here's to Scout, who taught us that sometimes the smallest members of the family are worth the biggest risks. Here's to Bella, who showed us that mothers come in all species but share the same fierce love. Here's to Harold, who's probably laughing at all this fuss from wherever he's watching. And here's to second chances, which apparently come to those who are too stubborn to give up and too loving to let go. They drank their sweet tea and ate Sarah's famous pot roast while Scout and Bella settled contentedly at their feet. Outside, the Oklahoma sunset painted the sky in colors that would have made Harold reach for his camera, and the pond where their ordeal had begun reflected the light like a mirror of possibilities. Later that evening, as Martha tucked Scout into his bed beside her own, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace. The python was long gone, relocated to a proper sanctuary where it could live according to its nature without threatening innocent creatures. The farm was secure, the family was whole, and the future stretched ahead like a gift they had earned through courage and love. "Sweet dreams, hero," she whispered to Scout, who responded with a contented sigh and the kind of trust that only comes from knowing you are completely, unconditionally loved. As Martha drifted off to sleep in the farmhouse where she had learned to be brave, she smiled at the thought that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when love demanded it. The Carter family had survived their python, literally and metaphorically. Now they were ready to show the world what came after surviving. They were ready to thrive. At 78, Martha Carter discovered something that changes everything about how we view our golden years. That our greatest victories often come disguised as our darkest moments. When that python wrapped around little Scout, Martha didn't see her age, her heart condition, or her limitations. She saw a grandmother's duty to protect innocence, and that made all the difference. Too many of us have been told that our best days are behind us, that we should step aside and let younger people handle life's battles. But Martha's story proves what many of us have always known in our hearts, that courage doesn't have an expiration date, that love doesn't weaken with age, and that sometimes the most important fights of our lives happen after we turn 70. Her farmhouse, that almost became a foreclosure notice, is now a symbol of hope for veterans and families across America. Her worthless old dog became a therapy animal changing lives daily. The lesson isn't just about fighting pythons. It's about recognizing that every day we wake up is another chance to prove that experience, wisdom, and a lifetime of love are the most powerful weapons we possess. Discussion questions. What moment in your life after 55 surprised you with your own strength and courage? How has a pet or animal companion brought unexpected joy and purpose to your later years? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences matter and inspire others facing similar challenges.